Hello everyone, my name is Cripples and welcome to Going Through Game of Thrones. In this video I will be talking about the 4th episode of the 1st season of Game of Thrones titled Cripples, Bastards and Broken Things. I'll be going through the plot of the episode, giving my thoughts, praise, criticisms and the like throughout. If I get something factually wrong or if you disagree with any of my thoughts or opinions, just leave a good-natured comment below letting me know. Don't go flying off the handle please. Also, before we start, I just want to thank everyone for the amazing reception my videos have received. It's really amazing and makes me so happy to see people enjoying what I'm making. I'll just let you know now though that these videos take quite a while to script and then edit together, so I apologise that they won't be coming out on a set schedule, but I'll try to get them done as fast as possible without skimping on the quality, and again, thank you all so much. With that said, let's begin. After the opening credits showing us King's Landing, Winterfell, The Wall and Vaestoflak, Bran, standing in Winterfell's courtyard practicing his archery, follows a raven to the entrance to the crypt, then wakes up as he sees it has 3 eyes. It was all a dream. He's in his bed with Summer laying next to him and old Nan sat nearby knitting away when Theon barges in making Summer growl. He tells Bran they are visitors but Bran doesn't want to go see them. Theon makes it clear that Robb is Lord of Winterfell, so he and Bran have to do what Robb says. He calls in Hodor to carry Bran to the Great Hall. Hodor says Hodor and picks Bran up. In the Great Hall, Tyrion and Yoren are stood before Robb, Maester Luwin and Grey Wind. Tyrion isn't amused about how he's being treated. Robb says any man of the Night's Watch is welcome at Winterfell, but Tyrion notices the same courtesy has not been given to him, calling Robb a boy. Robb points out that while his father is away, he is Lord of Winterfell, and Tyrion suggests he should learn a lord's courtesy then. Bran, Hodor and Theon enter and Tyrion immediately asks Bran if he remembers anything of his fall. Maester Luwin answers for Bran saying he cannot, which Tyrion finds curious. Robb demands to know why Tyrion is here. Tyrion makes Hodor kneel, then asks Bran if he likes to ride. Bran says he used to, with Maester Luwin pointing out Bran's legs no longer work. Tyrion dismisses that, saying with the right horse and saddle even a cripple can ride. Bran isn't happy about being called a cripple, denying he is one, and Tyrion says then he must not be a dwarf, and his father will be ecstatic. He gives Bran a note to give to their saddler and explains they must take a young horse and teach it to respond to the reins and voice rather than the legs. Bran skeptically asks if he will be able to ride, and Tyrion reassures him he will, and will be as tall as any man. Asking if all this is some kind of trick, Robb wants to know why Tyrion would want to help Bran, and Tyrion answers he has a tender spot in his heart for cripples, bastards and broken things. This shows how personal it's become for Tyrion, what we're going close with Jon on their journey to and at the Wall, showing an upbringing similar to his as a bastard, as his own as a dwarf, as he mentioned in episode 1. All dwarves are bastards in their father's eyes. With Jon then asking Tyrion to help Bran in the previous episode, he gives Bran the tools to be able to ride and be as tall as anyone, and not let his crippled legs leave him, like a dwarf, lower than everyone. Though still having the famous Lannister pride and smugness, Tyrion, out of all the Lannisters we have seen so far, has been shown to be the most kind and friendly to others who rank lower in society due to factors beyond their control. Robb now decides to extend the hospitality of Winterfell to Tyrion due to his kindness to Bran. Tyrion says he knows Robb only saying that as is expected of him, and that he doesn't really want him there at all, so he'll stay in a brothel outside of Winterfell instead. In the book, after Tyrion says the title of the episode, Rickon enters with his direwolf Shaggy Dog, who attacks Tyrion along with Grey Wind and Summer. Before the Lannister men can kill the direwolves, they are called off, with Robb not being sure why they attacked Tyrion. Just an interesting, seemingly random thing that happens that I wanted to mention. Back in the show, Tyrion's horse and ready to leave when Theon walks up telling Tyrion to ask for Ros if he likes his horse with red hair. Theon, he already knows her mate. Tyrion says it's nice for Theon to come see him off, even if his master doesn't seem to like him very much. Theon retorts Robb isn't his master, which Tyrion finds amusing. Having noticed there's no sign of Cat, Tyrion asks where she is. Theon tries to lie, saying she's not well, but Tyrion guesses she's not even in Winterfell. He asks where she's gone, and Theon starts to answer saying my lady, causing Tyrion to interrupt him to call Theon such a loyal captive, saying his father Balon Greyjoy must be proud to see his only surviving son turn lackey for the Starks. Tyrion turns the subject of the conversation to the Greyjoy Rebellion, a rebellion led by Theon's father Balon when he declared himself King of the Iron Islands. He mentions that he remembers seeing his father's fleet burning in Lannisport and asks Theon if the deed was done by his uncles, to which Theon answers with a smug smile on his face that it must have been a pretty sight. Tyrion wiped his smile off, saying the sight of sailors burning alive was indeed quite pretty. This attack was apparently a great victory for the Greyjoys, but Tyrion says it's a shame how the rebellion turned out in the end. Theon tries to defend the decision to rebel by pointing out they only lost because they were outnumbered 10 to 1. Tyrion appropriately calls it a stupid rebellion then, assuming Balon realised it was also when he lost it all but one son in battle and had to give up his last, Theon, to be Ned's ward when he surrendered. Theon warns Tyrion, calling him imp, and Tyrion says he's offended Theon and asks for forgiveness, similar to when he did the same when he first met Jon, but this time it comes across as a lot less sincere. He insults Theon and himself by saying they're both disappointments to their fathers, though he himself has learned to live with it. Saying Theon's next tumble with Ros is on him, he throws a coin at his feet and rides off, leaving Theon to give him the old Luigi death stare. Up north at Castle Castle Black, Jon Snow is teaching Gren some moves in the courtyard when Sir Alistair brings in an overweight new recruit. He introduces himself as Samwell Tarly, formerly of Horn Hill, and already he's being mocked for his size. Pip has said an 8th hell is going to be needed to fit him in, and when Sam says he's going to take the black, Rast jokes come to take the black pudding, making Gren and Pip laugh, but not Jon. Thorne pairs Rast with Sam to spar, and with 3 good hits, Rast knocks Sam to the floor. Sam begs for no more, but Thorne orders Rast to hit him till he stands back up, and calls Sam a squealing bloody pig. Jon attempts to intervene but is stopped by Pip, but eventually can't stand any more of Rast hitting Sam, and tells him to stop, saying Sam yielded. Jon helps Sam up with Thorne mocking him it must be love, then orders Gren and Pip and Rast to get past the bastard to make Lady Piggy squeal. Jon asks them if they're sure they want to do this, with Gren saying no and Pip looking unhappy, as the 3 have grown close since that first training session last episode. Rast, on the other hand, still doesn't like Jon very much, and is the first to try and get to Sam, only to be punched to the ground. The same happens to Pip. Gren gets shouldered in the chest. Rast, now back on his feet, lands a hit on Jon's back, but he's kneed in the balls and floored again. Gren stands back up and yields when Jon goes after him. Thorne isn't impressed and orders Jon to clean the armoury, as that's all he's good for. With him gone, Pip stands up, not looking any worse for wear, most likely having exaggerated how much Jon's punch hurt him, and ribs Gren, saying well fought, getting a piss off in response. Sam makes sure Jon's okay from Rast's hit, then says they can call him Sam. Jon tells him it's not going to get any easier, and Gren asks why Sam didn't fight back. Sam shocks them all by announcing he is a coward. Jon says the wall isn't a place for cowards, to which Sam agrees, then apologises and thanks Jon for protecting him, before picking up his sword and walking off. Gren's now worried other people will think him, Pip and Jon are cowards for talking to Sam, and Pip calls Gren too stupid to be a coward. Gren tries to come up with a witty retort, but fails and chases after Pip when he taunts, "Quick now, before summer's over," leaving Jon standing on his own, looking fed up. Vaes Dothrak has been in the intro sequence for episodes 2, 3 and 4, and finally we get to see it properly as Drogo's Khalasar arrives. Viserys is none too impressed, describing the city as just a pile of mud and sticks, and mocks them as savages for not being able to make anything better. Dany says he shouldn't call them savages as they are her people, but Viserys corrects her that they are his to use to retake Westeros, and complains Drogo is matching them the wrong way before riding ahead. With Viserys out of earshot, Dany asks Jorah if Viserys could actually conquer the Seven Kingdoms if given an army of Dothraki. Jorah reminds her that the Dothraki are scared of water horses can't drink, and so have never crossed a narrow sea. He persists, asking but what if they did cross, and Jorah admits King Robert will probably be stupid enough to meet them in open battle, but those who advise him are not. She asks if Jorah knows these advisors, and he says he fought alongside them once until he sold to a slaver and had to flee Ned and ice. Dany pretty much says it was his own fault for selling slaves, and Jorah, looking ashamed, agrees. So in the show, he seems to be more regretful for what he did, whereas in the book, he's definitely more angry towards Ned for, as he sees it, unreasonably wanting to execute him for just selling a few poachers. Dany asks why he did it, and he explains that he had no money due to having a very expensive wife, and when she asks where his wife is now, he says she is in another place, with another man. We learn more from him about his wife in the second A Song of Ice and Fire book, A Clash of Kings, that she had hated living on the cold, boring Bear Island, so when Ned condemned Jorah to death, they fled to the warmer Lys. There, Jorah tried desperately to support his wife's lavish lifestyle, but in the end, lost her to a rich merchant prince. Speaking of royalty, Viserys is sharing a bath with Doria. She wonders if Viserys does in fact have dragon's blood in his veins, as he is called the Last Dragon. He answers it's possible, and she asks what happened to the dragons, as she recalls hearing that brave men killed them all, possibly referring back to when Irri and Jiqui told Dany this in episode 2. Making Doria look into his eyes, he says brave men didn't kill the dragons, but rode them. Rode them from Valyria to Westeros to conquer and subjugate, and that the Iron Throne was made from the 1,000 swords of the slain melted together by dragonfire, like so many candles. Doria admits there's nothing in the world she'd rather see more than a dragon, and when Viserys asks why, she explains their very effective mode of transportation. Just a few flaps of their wings and they're somewhere else. She admires their ability to kill and melt anything that tries to hurt them, taking a candle and dripping the hot wax onto Viserys' chest and repeating his line, like so many candles. Viserys jokes when Doria says seeing a dragon would make her happy by pointing out the 15 years she spent in a pleasure house, so just being able to see the sky must make her happy. She corrects him that she wasn't locked in and that she has seen things. She's seen a man from Ashai with a dagger of real dragon glass, a man who can change his face just as easily as men change their clothes, and a pirate who wore his weight in gold and whose ship had colourful silk sails. She asks him if he's ever seen a dragon, but he says no, as the last one died quite a while before he was born, though he has seen their skulls as they used to be displayed in the throne room of the Red Keep. They ranged in size from the smallest one near the entrance, no bigger than a dog's skull, to the biggest towards the throne. He recites the names: Gisgar, Valryon, Vermithrax, Esovius, Arcane, Meraxes, Vhagar, and Balerion the Dread. Of these, only 3 are actually mentioned in the book: Meraxes, Vhagar, and Balerion. though technically you could say 4 with the last dragon skull also being mentioned, the smallest closest to the door of the throne room. The rest were created for the show. Just a short history lesson before I talk about these dragons so we're all on the same page. Valyria was the capital city of the Valyrian Freehold, a great empire in Essos located in the Valyrian Peninsula, and is the ancestral home of the surviving houses Targaryen, Celtigar, and Velaryon. I don't know if that's how you pronounce Velaryon, but that's how I'm going to pronounce it to make sure it sounds different to Valyrian. Okay? Good. You know how I said surviving? That's because Valyria was destroyed around 400 years ago by the time of the show and books in an event known as the Doom of Valyria, which is commonly believed to have been caused by all 14 of the Valyrian Peninsula's volcanoes, known as the 14 Flames, naturally erupting at once. Onto the dragons created just for the show, Giscar seems to be named after the Giscar region of Essos, whose Giscari people fought many wars with Valyria and lost their capital city of Ghis to Dragonfire when the Valyrian Freehold conquered them. Valryon, I think, is just a play on the name of House Velaryon, though if any of you guys even know or think it might be a reference to something else, let me know in the comments. Leaving the world of the show, according to Brian Cogman, D.B. Weiss named Vermithrax after the dragon Vermithrax pejorative from the 1981 fantasy film Dragon Slayer. Speaking of Dragon Slayer, George R.R. Martin also used several of the names from the movie for his own work. Tyrion Lannister shares a similar name to the character Tyrion, spelled Tyrian, and Valyria is from the character Valerian, played by Caitlin Clark, who may also have inspired the naming of Catelyn. Back to the dragons, Osovius appears to be emerging as the word for the eastern continent of the show and book world Essos, and I assume the real-world volcano Mount Vesuvius, which is most famously known for erupting in 79 AD and destroying Pompeii amongst other cities. Thank you, Doctor Who. Finally, the writers covered names Archonai after the Valyrian title of Archon, which was given to those elected to oversee the colonial cities and towns controlled by the Valyrian Freehold. The 3 dragons mentioned in both the show and the books, Meraxes, Vhagar, and Balerion, share names with 3 of the 4 gods once worshipped by the Valyrians of old, and in the 5th book, A Dance with Dragons, a dragon is mentioned that shares the same name as the 4th god, Syrax. No, that's the wrong Syrax. Still the wrong Syrax. Perfection. Back with Viserys and Doria, all this talk of dragons has really turned the heat up, but Doria wants to keep the conversation going, pulling away from Viserys and asking what happened to all the skulls. Viserys, slightly confused, says he suspects King Robert probably had them ground down into powder and goes back to kissing Doria, but she pulls away again, saying she thinks that's very sad. Annoyed at her constant interruptions of their lovemaking, Viserys questions why he bought Doria. To make him sad, Doria answers no, it was to teach Dany how to pleasure men, but then becomes confused when Viserys asks her if she really believes he bought her to teach Dany how to make Drogo happy. I don't know, Viserys, maybe Doria thought she was in the world of the book, where you did in fact buy her for that exact purpose? In any case, he tells his pretty little idiot to carry on with the old in-out, leaning back and not showing as much passion or enthusiasm as he was before. With all this talk of the dragon skulls in the throne room of the Red Keep, we cut to the throne room of the Red Keep with Septa Mordane and Sansa, sans skulls. Walking towards the Iron Throne, Sansa doesn't look too happy, whereas Septa Mordane is looking pretty proud as she tells Sansa how one day when Joffrey is the king and Sansa's husband, he will sit upon the throne and Sansa next to him. When Septa Mordane mentions Sansa and Joffrey having a son and presenting the prince to the court, Sansa asks, but what if it's a girl? What if she only has girls? Septa Mordane says it's highly unlikely, but if it were to happen, that if Joffrey died without Sansa giving him an heir, then the crown would pass to the younger brother Tommen. Sansa says that if that were to happen, then everyone would hate her. Septa Mordane reassures her that no one could ever hate her, but Sansa argues Joffrey does. Septa Mordane calls that nonsense. She wonders why Sansa thinks that, and guessing it might be due to what happened to Lady, starts to say something in the realm of a direwolf is no pet, when Sansa snaps at her to shut up about it. Sansa starts to walk away, but Septa Mordane stops her, asking her if she remembers her lessons and who built the Iron Throne. Sansa answers it was Aegon the Conqueror, and answers Maegor the Cruel when asked who built the Red Keep. Septa Mordane starts to ask how many years it took to build when Sansa interrupts her, saying her grandfather Rickard Stark and uncle Brandon Stark were murdered in this room. Septa Mordane says yes, they were by order of King Aerys, more commonly known as the Mad King. When Sansa asks why they were killed, Septa Mordane suggests Sansa speak to her father about it, but Sansa says she will never speak to her father and will never find it in her heart to forgive him. Bitch, it's Cersei you should be mad at, not your dad. Book Sansa understands that Cersei is the one to hate. If you hadn't intervened and ordered Lady's body sent back to Winterfell, at least in the book, you'd be bursting into tears every time you saw Cersei walking around wearing her fur like a blonde Cruella de Vil. Speaking of Ned, he and the small council are listening to a report from Commander of the City Watch, Janos Slynt. Apparently much trouble is happening in King's Landing of late, with only just last night there being a tavern riot, a brothel fire, 3 stabbings, a drunken horse race down the Street of Sisters, and a partridge in a pear tree. Janos blames all of this on the increasing number of people arriving for the Hands tournament. Ned says it's the King's tournament, not the hands, as he wants no part of it, but Janos says you can call it whatever you like. Take a bucket of piss and call it Granny's peach tea, but it doesn't change the facts. Renly pipes up, suggesting Janos isn't very good at his job of keeping the peace, and maybe they should find someone who can. I like Varys looking fed up when Renly says that, like he's thinking, oh great, that'll mean even more meetings. Janos says he needs more men, and Ned puts in an order for 50, saying Peter will handle the bill, as since he's managed to find 90,000 gold dragons for the tournament winners, he can find some more to keep the city safe. Ned also loans Janos 20 of his own men until it's all over, and Janos promises to make good use of them. Ned can't wait for this whole tournament business to be over, though Varys points out that it does bring much needed joy and distraction to all the lofty and lowly people of the kingdoms alike. Peter mentions as well how all the inns will be filled and bow-legged whores will walk the streets, but Ned's in no mood, saying he knows many will profit from the tourney, looking at Peter, who employs many of the whores of which he speaks. With that, Ned ends the meeting. Renly rushes off without a look back, Varys gives Ned a nod, and Peter gives a low bow. The slowly shuffling Pycelle comments on the heat and his envy of the Northerners' summer snows and bids Ned till tomorrow, but Ned stops him, hoping to talk about Jon Arryn. Pycelle explains whatever sickness Jon Arryn had struck him very hard and very fast, and he was unable to save him, that his death was very sad to everyone. He mentions that he saw Jon Arryn the night before he died, as he often came to him for counsel. Ned asks why, and Pycelle takes offence. He starts to explain that many kings and hands have come to him for advice, but Ned interrupts, clarifying he meant why did Jon Arryn go to see him the night before he died. Pycelle answers Jon Arryn was looking for a book, and when Ned asks what book, Pycelle looks worried and chuckles that the book is a ponderous tome and wouldn't be of any interest to Ned. With that said though, Ned still wants to read it. Cut to Pycelle's quarters, and he places the book, the lineages and histories of the great houses of the Seven Kingdoms, with descriptions of many high lords and noble ladies and their children, before Ned, who opens it and reads a passage from it. Harkon Umber, first of his name, born to Lord Hother Umber and Lady Amaryllis Umber in the 183rd year after Aegon's landing, the last hearth, blue of eye, brown of hair, and fair-complected, died in his 14th year of a wound sustained in a bear hunt. Pycelle reiterates how much of a ponderous tome the book is, and says that he did not presume to ask Jon Arryn what he wanted with it. Ned asks if Jon Arryn told him anything on his deathbed, and Pycelle says that he did keep repeating one phrase: the seed is strong. Ned wonders what Jon Arryn could have meant by that, but Pycelle theorises it could have just been the ravings of a dying, demented mind. Ned asks him if he's sure Jon Arryn died of natural causes, suggesting instead he could have been poisoned, and that poison is said to be a woman's weapon. Pycelle finds the thought of Jon Arryn being murdered disturbing, and agrees women do usually use poison, but so also do cravens and eunuchs. He asks if Ned knows Varys is a eunuch. Ned answers everyone knows, and Pycelle shows his disdain towards that sort of man, making his way onto the small council. Hearing enough, Ned takes the ponderous tome and his leave. Heading back to his room, he spots Arya balancing on one foot at the top of the stairs. She explains that Syrio says a water dancer can stand on one toe for hours. You call that one toe, Arya? You should take some lessons from Rose. And that's what I call being on your toes. Ned points out it's going to be a really painful fall down those stairs, but apparently Syrio says every hurt is a lesson, and with each lesson she'll get better. Tomorrow she'll also be chasing cats, as Syrio says they're quiet as shadows and light as feathers, and you have to be quick to catch them. Jesus Christ, Syrio, why don't you change your name to Confucius? Ned's about to enter his room when Arya asks if Bran's going to come live with them now. Ned says if he is to, he needs to get stronger first. He mentions how Bran always wanted to join the Kingsguard but can't anymore. Ned agrees, but says he could still be a lord of a holdfast, sit on the King's Council, or build castles like Bran the Builder of old, if he chooses. They sit down on the steps together, and Arya excitedly asks if she could also be a lord of a holdfast, but Ned laughs, kisses her on her forehead, and tells her that she will marry a high lord, rule his castle, and have many sons who will be knights and princes and lords. Losing all the excitement she had on her face as Ned tells her this, she says no, that's not me, and goes back to balancing at the top of the steps. This doesn't seem to upset Ned at all. It's not like one of those situations where a child tells their parent they're gay and the parent gets mad or disappointed. Hell, Ned even has a smile on his face as he turns to stand back up, though maybe he's not taking her too seriously and think it's just a phase she'll grow out of. It's not a phase, Ned. Top the wall, Jon Snow is keeping watch and trying to keep warm when Sam shows up, saying Thorne's made him Jon's new watch partner, but warns him he can't see that well. Jon tells him to get closer to the fire, but as it's near the edge of the wall, Sam can't, as he doesn't like high places, though does under Jon's intense staring. Just completely done with Sam's constant issues, Jon wants to know why he's at the wall. Sam explains that on his 18th birthday, his father, Randall Tarley, told him he wasn't worthy to ever become head of House Tarley, and that tomorrow Sam will take the black to allow everything to eventually pass to his brother Dickon. If Sam refused, then a hunt would be held, and somewhere in the woods he would be thrown from his horse to die. At least that's what his father would tell his mother, taking great joy in doing so. Jon, in stunned silence, can only look away. Sam asks if Thorne's going to make him fight again tomorrow, and Jon answers yes. He groans and tells Jon he's not going to get any better, and Jon agrees, but says at least he can't get any worse, and at that they share a laugh. The book goes into more detail of how much Sam's father was disappointed in him. He's described as being a lot more stereotypically feminine than stereotypically masculine whilst growing up, loving to listen to music and make his own songs, wearing soft clothes, reading books, dancing, and kittens. Samwell Savage Sam Tarley, Lord of Hornhill and head of House Tarley during the reign of King Aenys Targaryen I, who wielding the Valyrian steel sword Heartsbane, cut down dozens of Dornish outlaws and executed the Vulture King that led them by having him die of exposure during the Second Dornish War, this Samwell Tarley is most definitely not. Many masters at arms tried to make him more manly by order of his father, was cursed, caned, slapped, starved, forced to sleep in chainmail and forced to wear his mother's clothes, whilst being paraded around in public to shame him. His father even went so far as to summon 2 white-skinned, blue-lipped warlocks from Karth to bathe Sam in fresh bull aurochs blood, despite the fact that the sight of blood makes Sam ill. None of that worked, so Sam was coerced into taking the black, allowing the title of Lord of Hornhill and the ancestral Tiley family sword Heartsbane to pass instead to his brother Dickon. This is in stark contrast to how Ned is treating Arya's aversion to being a lady and wanting to learn how to sword fight. You see what I did there? Stark contrast, Ned Stark, Arya Stark. Ned didn't confiscate Needle when he found Arya with it, he allowed her to keep it, and even went to the trouble of finding someone to teach her how to use it. And in this episode, before the scene with Sam and Jon, when Arya made it clear to her father that she isn't a lady, did Ned get mad? Did he bring in a bunch of scepters to force Arya to become more ladylike? Did he summon 2 woods witches with yellow eyes and no teeth to bathe Arya in cow aurochs milk? Of course he didn't, because he's not a cunt. If only Sam had had a dad like Ned, and not Randall the arsehole Tarly. Speaking of Ned, he's taking a walk in some kind of garden area with Peter, who mentions he knows Ned's reading a ponderous tome from the old blabbermouth Pycelle. He goes on to tell Ned about a man called Sir Hugh of the Vale, who was a squire knighted immediately after his master's death, his master being Jon Arryn. When Ned asks why Hugh was knighted, Peter makes a face and gives a slight shrug. So does he really not know, or is he just not saying? Ned wants to know why he's telling him this, and Peter reminds him of the promise he made to Cat last episode to help Ned discover the truth of who tried to kill Bran and to keep him alive. Ned decides he will see Sir Hugh, but Peter warns him that that would be a bad idea. He points out a boy they pass as being one of Varys' informers, an old man working in the garden being one of the queens, and a scepter pretending to read as being one of his, all who are keeping an eye on what Ned does. In light of this, Peter suggests Ned discreetly selects someone who he trusts completely to go speak to Hugh in his place, as well as visit an armoury at the top of the Street of Steel, which Peter's informers have told him Jon Arryn visited several times before his death. A little reluctantly, Ned admits he may have been too hasty in distrusting Peter, but Peter disagrees, saying distrusting him was the wisest thing Ned's done since arriving at King's Landing. At the tilt yard, Jory, who I forgot to mention previously is nephew to Sir Roderick Castle, finds Hugh counting the length of it in what would you call that, big steps? Strides? In any case, Jory interrupts Hugh, saying he's come to talk to him on behalf of the Hand of the King. Hugh apologises for not catching Jory's name, prompting him, Sir, but Jory tells him he isn't a Sir, as he isn't a knight. So Hugh the Pompous makes it very clear though that he himself is a knight, before turning his back on Jory and continuing his counting. Now riding up the Street of Steel, Jory tells Ned that Hugh, being a knight you see, refused to talk to him, but would gladly talk to the Hand of the King. He warns Ned that he shouldn't be out in public like this, as any of these people could be acting as eyes for someone else. Ned says let them look, and heads into the armoury Peter spoke about. Speaking to the proprietor, Tobbo Mott, Ned learns that Jon Arryn did visit several times to see Mott's apprentice Gendry. Ned wants to see him as well, so Mott calls Gendry over and tells him to show off the bull's head helmet he's made to the Hand. When asked why Jon Arryn came to see him, Gendry explains that he just came to ask him some questions about his work, if he was being treated well, if he liked the place. Then he was asked about his mother, who she was and what she looked like, with him answering she died when he was young, she had yellow hair and used to sing to him. Ned makes Gendry look at him and they stare at each other for a short while as comprehension dawns on Ned's face. He lets Gendry get back to his work and tells Mott that if the day comes when Gendry wants to wield a sword rather than forge one, he should be sent to him before taking his leave. Outside, Jory asks if Ned's discovered anything and Ned answers Robert Baratheon's bastard son. Geez, Ned, say it a little louder, why don't you? Your farmers also have ears as well as eyes, you know. Still following Jory's travels around King's Landing, he comes across Jaime standing guard outside the King's chambers. He says he has the note for the King from Ned and starts to ask if he should leave it with Jaime, but is interrupted by him telling Jory to listen. Coming from behind the door is the sound of the King's laughter and also the laughter and gleeful shrieks of multiple women. Jaime asks Jory to guess how many women are in the room with the King. Jory first guesses 3, then guesses the 4, but Jaime shakes his head. He tells Jory that this is what the King likes to do when he's on guard duty, make Jaime listen as he insults Cersei. Bad timing then when a woman leaves the room and hurries past them. Jory tries to bring the topic of the conversation back around to Ned's note for the King, but makes the mistake of starting with "Forgive me, my lord," causing Jaime to interrupt him again, rhetorically asking, "Why do I have to forgive you? Have you wronged me?" Jory decides to change the topic himself, mentioning how he and Jaime have actually met before, fighting side by side at the Siege of Pike against the Greyjoys. That was where Jory got his scar when a Greyjoy nearly took his eye out. Jaime asks if Jory remembers Thoros of Myr charging through the breached walls with a flaming sword. Jory answers he'll remember that till the day he dies. With all this talk of Greyjoys, Jaime mentions how he saw Theon at Winterfell, which was like seeing a shark on a mountaintop. I guess he means it was such a bizarre sight to see a Greyjoy amongst so many Starks, like a more imaginative way of saying fish out of water. As Jory says Theon's a good lad and Jaime voices his doubts, the door opens again and 2 more women hurry from the room. They leave it open, forcing Jaime to close it as we hear the King saying to one of the women still in there that he bets she smells like blackberry jam and he wants to smell it. Jaime, now thoroughly pissed off, snaps at Jory that he doesn't serve Ned when he's asked if the note can be left with him. Jory walks off, leaving Jaime looking kind of regretful of his outburst. He should have tried to keep Jory with him, in my opinion, to talk and distract him from the noises coming from behind the door. At Castle Black, Jon sits down with Gren and Pip, saying he was on watch with Sam, who isn't joining them as he isn't hungry. Pip calls him Prince Porkchop and laughs with Gren that Sam not being hungry is impossible. John tells him to stop, that there'll be no more insulting Sam as he's no different from anyone else at the wall, having had nowhere else to go, and that Gren and Pip won't hurt him whilst training, no matter what Thorn says. Turns out Rasty's sitting right behind John and pipes up that John really is in love, echoing Thorn's words from earlier, making many laugh. He calls John, Gren and Pip girls, saying they can do as they please, but he's going to slice himself off a side of bacon from Lady Piggy the next time he goes up against him. This elicits more laughs, but John ain't too impressed. That night, the three, along with Ghost, pay Rast a visit as he sleeps, warning him that no one touches Sam as Ghost snarls in his face to emphasise the point. How no one else in the room wakes up from all that snarling I don't know, unless they're just pretending to sleep. In the book it was more believable to have happened quietly, as book Ghost never makes a sound. He never snarls, growls or howls at all. The next morning in the courtyard, Rast is up against Sam, but with continuous glances at John decides to only knock Sam's sword out of his hand and lightly tap him on the arm with his own despite Thorn's shouts. Thorn, getting mad, orders Gren to have a go at Sam, but Gren tells Sam to hit him, exaggerating the severity of the blow and dropping to the ground yelling in pain when he does. Sam looks confused and John's got a smile on his face when Thorn grabs him by the neck, demanding to know if he thinks this is all funny. He shoves him away and asks to the courtyard who would they rather want with them when they're beyond the wall, a man or a snivelling boy. Speaking of snivelling, at Vasto Flak, Doria cries as Viserys drags her by her hair into Dany's tent, shouting how dare Dany send someone to command him and that he should have sent her back Doria's head. Dany has Eerie take Doria out and asks Viserys why he hit her. He tells her no one commands him, but Dany says she wasn't commanding him but asking him to supper. He notices some Dothraki clothing laid out and disgusted by the idea that they are a gift for him from Dany, throwing them in a chain of medallions at her. Angry that she would want to dress him like one of them, he says next she'll want to braid his hair, but Dany, now angry herself, points out he has no right to her braid as he's never won any victories. Viserys slaps her to the ground and pins her there with his body, calling her a horse-lord slut and saying she's now woken the dragon. He's about to strike her again, but Dany grabs the chain of medallions he had thrown at her a moment earlier and swings it into his face, knocking him off of her. Dany stands and tells her shocked brother that she is Khaleesi to the great Khal Drogo, that she carries his son inside of her and that the next time Viserys raises a hand to her will be the last time he has hands. A different warning than the one she gives him in the book, where she tells him to leave before she has him dragged out and that he better hope Drogo doesn't hear about what happened or Viserys won't be very happy with what her husband will do to him. I prefer the way it's done in the show, where it seems to be a more direct threat from Dany, that she will be the one to order Viserys' hands removed if he ever hits her again. Also, Viserys in the book still shows some defiance against Dany after this threat, warning her that she will rue this day after he retakes Westeros. Again, I prefer how he is shown in the show, looking quite terrified that his previously easily intimidated sister is now standing up to him, even hurting him and threatening him. Back at Castle Black, Sam and Jon are cleaning the tables with sand when Sam says he knows for a 100% irrefutable absolute fact that some of the Night's Watch officers visit the brothel in Molestown, and Jon's just like, yeah, probably. Sam thinks it's pretty unfair that everyone takes the vow to be celibate, but officers are able to flout it and pop out for a little Sally on the side. I like Jon's reaction to Sam's use of the phrase Sally on the side. I wonder how he'd react to hearing Kat say back alley Sally. Jon says he wouldn't have thought it'd be that upsetting for him. Sam asks if he thinks that because he's fat. Jon says no, and Sam admits that though he likes girls just as much as Jon, it's true that they don't like him as much and that he's never been with one. He says Jon's probably had hundreds of girls, but Jon corrects him that he's had none. He came close to once with a whore, but it didn't happen. Sam asks if it's because he didn't know where to put it, but Jon answers he knows where to put it and goes on to describe the whore as young and gorgeous when Sam asks if she was old and ugly, had red hair when Sam asks what colour it was, and amazing mummy milkers when Sam asks what they were like by grabbing his own. Who's that whore? It's Ros. Sam wonders then why Jon and Ros didn't do the horizontal mambo when Jon gets Sam to answer why his last name is Snow. You're a bastard from the north. Jon goes on to explain how he never met his mother, doesn't know her name, if she's alive or dead, if she's a noblewoman or a fisherman's wife, or most importantly to this conversation, a whore. He didn't want to risk getting Ros pregnant and bringing another bastard Snow into the world, as he knows from experience that it's not a good life for a child. He gets back to scrubbing when Sam leans over and jokes that Jon didn't in fact know where to put it. Laughing, they go to start play fighting when Thorn walks in. Ah, shit. He rhetorically asks if they are enjoying themselves and notes they look cold. Sam agrees it's a bit nippy, but Thorn's having none of it by pointing out they're inside, by the fire, and it's still summer. He wonders if they even remember the last winter 10 years ago, singling Jon out of the pair, asking if it was uncomfortable at Winterfell, if there were days when he could never get warm no matter how many fires the servants built. Jon retorts that he builds his own fires, and Thorn scoffs at that being admirable of him. Thorn then recollects on the time he spent 6 months beyond the wall on what was only meant to be a 2-week mission to capture some of Mance Rayder's wildlings. They found themselves stuck in the middle of a storm with winds so strong it could rip up trees and the temperature so cold you lost fingers to frostbite if you took off your gloves. He says it was easy to eat the dead horses, but his dead comrades, not so much. He moves to get right up close to Sam, terrifying him as he wishes they'd had a few soft fat boys like him with them, how they could have eaten him for weeks and still been able to make bone soup after. He finishes by saying they'll be given their assignments when the next recruits come, that they'll take their vows to become men of the Night's Watch, but only fools will believe that. They're still boys and when winter comes they will die, like flies. Similar to the scene in the last episode with Robert, Barristan and Jaime swapping stories, reminding me of the scene with Quince, Hooper and Brody swapping stories in Jaws, so too does Thorn's monologue here remind me of Quince about him surviving the sinking of the USS Indianapolis Viserys and the shark attacks that followed. Powerful stuff. At Vestoflak, Dany, now sporting a shiner, is talking to Jorah, telling him how she hit Viserys, hit the dragon. Jorah disagrees. Viserys isn't a dragon, as the last dragon was her brother Rhaegar, and Viserys is less than a shadow of a snake. But she points out that Viserys is the rightful king, though admits she wouldn't want to see him sit on the Iron Throne. She argues, however, that the common people do, that Illyrio has said they are secretly sewing dragon banners and praying for Viserys to return. Jorah scoffs at that notion, telling her that the common people pray for rain, health, and a summer that never ends, not giving a fig about the games the high and powerful play, or as he says in the book, their Game of Thrones. Dany asks him what he prays for. He answers home and she concurs, but has come to the realization that Viserys could never retake Westeros even with Drogo's Khalasar, that he will never take them home. At the tilt yard in King's Landing, Robert looks drunk and fed up as hell, and Cersei's rocking a brand new do. Sansa sat with Arya and Septa Mordane catches Joffrey's eye and smiles at him, but Joffrey looks away. Peter, having just arrived, notices, saying, "Lovers quarrel?" Sansa doesn't know who Peter is, so Septa Mordane introduces him. Sitting, he says he's an old friend of the family and that he's known Sansa's mother for a long time, and Arya interrupts, asking why people call him Littlefinger. Sansa and Septa Mordane round on Arya to not be rude, but Peter says it's fine and explains it's an exceedingly clever nickname due to him having been a small child from a small piece of land known as the Fingers. Hilarious! In the book, it's also revealed that Cat's brother Edmure was in fact the one to give him the nickname Littlefinger when he was a ward at Riverrun. Red-faced Robert shouts for the joust to start before he pisses his britches, and exasperated-looking Cersei leaves. Sansa, seeing one of the jousters is a giant man in black armour, asks Peter who it is, and he answers it's the Hound's older brother Gregor Clegane, and his opponent in the joust is Sir Hugh, who looks very worried to be up against him. The joust begins, and after the first pass, no one is unhorsed, though something I noticed, which I can only assume is due to an editing error, Hugh's lance with the metal fist on the end of it is in his hand here, then missing, then back again. Weird. Speaking of lances, at the next pass, Gregor's lance, which has nothing on the end of it, lodges into Hugh's neck, splintering off and knocking him to the ground right in front of Sansa and the others to bleed out. Septa Mordane has her mouth covered in shock and Arya's wide-eyed, but Sansa and Peter just stare somewhat passively as Hugh dies. Not something you'd expect from someone so ladylike and gentle as Sansa. This is even shown in the book, with her watching with a strange fascination as she had never seen a man die before. Peter takes this opportunity to tell Sansa and everyone else, obviously listening in, a little story. Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise? Whoops, sorry, wrong quote. I mean, has anyone ever told you the story of the Mountain and the Hound? He tells the tale of how an 11-year-old and very violent Gregor found 6-year-old Sandor playing with one of Gregor's toys, so he grabbed Sandor's head and held it in a brazier against the burning coals. He says to her not many people know that story, and she promises not to tell anyone. He strongly agrees with that if she ever did and the Hound heard her, no one would be able to save her from him. In the book, it's actually the Hound himself who tells Sansa this story whilst escorting her back to her chambers by order of Prince Joffrey. He says many think he received his burned face whilst in battle, one even thought it was dragon's breath, but he tells her the same story as Peter does in the show and gives her the same warning not to tell anyone or he'll kill her. At the Tower of the Hound, Cersei visits Ned with the hope to put everything that happened on the King's Road behind them, specifically what happened with the wolves and forcing Ned to kill Lady. Excuse me, but you didn't force him to do anything. You forced Robert to have Lady killed and Ned offered to do it. Get your facts right, Cersei. Or is this you using that 1984 rewriting history tactic that you told Joffrey he'll be able to use when he's king in the last episode? In any case, she asks how Sansa is. Ned says she likes it at King's Landing, and Cersei smiles that she seems to be the only Stark that does, favouring her mother in not having much of the North in her. Wanting Cersei to get to the real reason for her visit, Ned asks what she's doing here, but she turns the question back on him, to which Ned answers he's here to serve the king until ordered otherwise. Cersei argues Ned's not going to be of much help, no one can change the king, he'll just do what he wants and when he wants, leaving Ned to pick up the pieces. Ned says that if that's his job, then that's what he'll do. Cersei calls Ned a British soldier, taking his orders and carrying on, which makes sense as it was his older brother Brandon who was raised to lead, whereas he was trained to follow. Ned retorts that he was also trained to kill his enemies, to which Cersei replies, samesies. Throughout all this, Ned has left the ponderous tome open on his desk, turned to the page for House Baratheon with the Valyrian sword dagger on top of it. Either he'd hoped to have enough time to hide them away if anyone came visiting, which didn't work this time, and Cersei walks straight in as Jory announced her. All like when he went to the Street of Steel, he just doesn't care who sees what he's doing. Speaking of the business with the wolves, Cat and Roderick are staying at the inn where it all went down. Whilst being harassed by a bard named Marillion who's wanting free food and drink for a song, Cat and Roderick are shocked when Tyrion enters. With the innkeeper saying the place is booked full, he says his men can sleep in the stable and pays off a sellsword called Bronn for his room, then notices Cat calling it an unexpected pleasure. With the innkeeper only now curtsying to her and Cat saying her surname was Tully the last time she stayed at the inn, I guess she and Roderick didn't honour them with their patronage when they made their way to King's Landing, which makes more sense in the book as they took a ship to King's Landing as explained in my last video. Cat calls on a man with the black bat of Harrenhal on his coat, asking if Lady Wentz of Harrenhal is still a true and honest friend of her father, Lord Hoster Tully, getting a yes in answer. She calls on another man, saying the Red Stallion of Stonehenge is always a welcome sight in Riverrun, and her father counts Lord Jonas Bracken amongst his most loyal bannermen. The man says his lord is honoured by her father's trust. Incredibly confused, Tyrion says he envies Cat's father all his friends, but doesn't understand why Cat's pointing them all out. Finally, Cat calls on a man man wearing the sigil of the Twin Towers of Frey, asking him how his lord is. The man answers Lord Walder Frey is well, and has asked Kat's father to attend his 90th birthday, and that he plans to take another wife, which Tyrion scoffs at. Rounding on Tyrion, she accuses him of conspiring to murder her 10-year-old son, and invoking the name of King Robert, calls upon those in the room to seize him and take him to Winterfell to await the king's justice. Those that Kat called on, Roderick and many others, draw their swords on Tyrion and his men to end the episode. So, that was the 4th episode of the first season of Game of Thrones, titled Cripples, Bastards and Broken Things, and my god, so much dialogue. My script for the last episode was 9 pages long, the script for this episode was 16. I tried to make sure to make it more than just all he said, she said by using a thesaurus, but my god, it was difficult. I say that I'm blaming the length of my script on the amount of dialogue in the episode, but maybe it's just me suddenly going into more detail than I have previously, not leaving out as much stuff as I did before, but I don't know, all the dialogue I brought up, I did so because I thought it was important. In conclusion, I'd put this episode in the rank of good, with my favourite part going to Jon standing up for Sam. I'm biased because I'm also an overweight guy called Sam, so yeah. And my most disliked going to Sansa being mad at her dad for what happened to Lady and not Cersei. You should be grateful for what your father did, Sansa, not hateful. Thank you all so much for watching. If you have any advice on what I could do better for the next video, please leave it in a comment below. Next time we'll be covering the 5th episode of the first season of Game of Thrones, titled The Wolf and the Lion, so don't forget to like, subscribe and comment, even if it's just to say Sirio says. Thank you again for watching, and I shall see you all next time. Goodbye.